They called me the family failure for 15 years, the one who couldn't handle the real world, the one who threw away a perfectly good education on digital nonsense. Funny thing is, the same people who said that will be stepping off a private jet in less than 48 hours, my private jet, believing they're headed to a simple family reunion. They have no idea the world they built on my humiliation is about to crack wide open. The Arizona sunrise poured through my floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the marble kitchen counter into a sheet of liquid gold. The unopened invitation lay there embossed with red script, the Callahan family reunion celebrating 40 years of legacy. Legacy. That word used to choke me. For the Callahans, legacy meant obedience, money, appearances. For me, it meant survival. I stared at my reflection in the glass, the tailored cream blouse, the quiet diamond studs, the calm face no one ever expected to see on Forbes. The headline glowed from my phone: the ghost founder of Viridian, Nora Callahan's digital art empire, valued at $9.4 billion. It still looked unreal even to me. My assistant Jade had called before dawn, her voice steady but charged. "The article drops tomorrow, Nora. Once it's live, they'll all know." I had only smiled. Good. Let them choke on it. I remembered every dinner, every patronizing pat on the hand, every time my father's voice sharpened like glass when I said I wanted to build something on my own. Art doesn't pay bills, he'd say, his jaw tight. And family doesn't tolerate foolishness. Family. What a convenient word when used as a leash. I had kept my distance all these years, answering birthday texts with polite emojis, sending obligatory Christmas cards pretending the wound was scar tissue. But it wasn't. It was an ember, and embers, when given air, burn. My phone buzzed again, a message from Patrick, my brother. "Is it true, 9 billion, you tell me this isn't real?" I let the screen go dark. He'd find out soon enough. They all would. I walked to the glass balcony, coffee in hand, the desert stretching endless and clean beneath me. The world had changed. I had changed. But they still thought I was the girl who drove the dented Honda Civic and worked out of a garage. I'd let them believe that because silence had power. It made them underestimate me. It made the reveal sharper. The truth wasn't just that I had succeeded, it was that I had succeeded in the very world they mocked, the world they said had no future. And now their future would depend on me. I ran a finger along the edge of the invitation. Legacy. I murmured the word, tasting different now. This time, the legacy would be mine to define, not theirs. My father Charles once told me, "You'll understand the value of control when you've lost it." He was right, just not in the way he thought. They controlled me through shame. I'd control them through truth. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each sound a reminder that the countdown had begun. 48 hours until the reunion. 48 hours until the Callahans learned that the daughter they dismissed had built an empire from the silence they forced her into. I took one last look at the Forbes headline, the numbers glowing like judgment. 9.4 billion. Quiet success. Loud justice. Then I whispered into the still air almost gently. After 15 years, they finally get to see what failure looks like when it wins. By mid-morning, my phone had become a war zone. Notifications poured in relentless flashing names I hadn't seen in years. At first, I ignored them, sipping coffee while the desert light turned harsh and brilliant across the horizon. Then I saw the name that made my pulse still dad. Charles Callahan. The man who used to slam his palm on the dinner table whenever I spoke about art, as if the word itself was an insult to his law degree. His voice burst through the speaker, sharp, commanding, polished like always. "Nora, what the hell am I reading? Some online rag says you're a billionaire. You couldn't possibly think this was the way to tell us." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "I didn't tell you anything, Dad. You stopped listening years ago." A long pause, then the sound of his controlled breathing. "You think this little stunt changes who you are? You're still the same ungrateful child who threw away everything we gave you." My hand tightened around the coffee mug, the ceramic warm against my skin. "No, Dad," I said softly. "I'm the woman who built something while you were busy protecting your reputation." He hung up, just like that. The old pattern he speaks, I absorb, he exits. But this time, the silence that followed didn't sting. It satisfied. 10 minutes later, another call, Patrick. I didn't need to answer to know his tone. The memory of his arrogance was practically muscle memory, but I did. Pat, what the hell? Nora, he barked. You let Forbes run a piece like that without clearing it. Do you realize how this makes us look? I wasn't aware my life required your approval, I said. Your life. You are a Callahan. Everything you do affects the family name. His voice trembled not with concern, but fear. Fear of embarrassment of losing the position he worshipped. This article's already viral, he continued. Dad's furious. Lauren's... He stopped. I could hear her in the background whispering, dramatizing. Let them be, I said. You'll understand soon enough. Understand what the difference between silence and defeat. I ended the call. My hand didn't shake. That, more than the words themselves, told me how far I'd come. Moments later, a third call buzzed through Lauren, the elegant voice that could cut like a scalpel. Darling, she cooed, I wish you'd told us. Family deserves transparency. I nearly laughed. Transparency, I repeated. Is that what you call it when you gossip to country club friends about how your stepdaughter's wasting her life? That was years ago, she said, the chill under her sugar tone obvious. We all say things we don't mean. No, Lauren, you say things you mean and pretend you don't. The silence stretched. Then she exhaled, practiced, perfect. Your father's hurt. He feels you've tried to humiliate him. He humiliated himself the moment he stopped believing in me. I ended the call before she could reply. I set the phone face down and looked around the penthouse, my space, my design, my air. For 15 years, I had built quietly while they sculpted narratives to make me small. Now, a single article had dismantled all of it. I could almost hear the walls of their control cracking. They wanted legacy image obedience. What they were about to get was exposure. I glanced at the reunion invitation on the counter again. 40 years of legacy, it read. I whispered to the empty room. Let's celebrate it properly. 15 years earlier, the Callahan dining room glowed with the same perfection it always had. Crystal glasses, white linen, a table polished enough to reflect your guilt. I was 23, freshly graduated from Brown, with a double major in art and technology, and my head swarmed with ideas that made my heart race faster than fear could slow it. I've built something, I said that night, standing with my laptop open between the salad forks and the wine decanter. A digital art marketplace that lets creators sell and authenticate their work online. I call it Viridian. Patrick was the first to laugh. His suit jacket creaked as he leaned back, arms folded, the golden child in full form. You mean like eBay for doodles? He smirked. Lauren's voice floated in soft but sharp. Sweetheart, people don't buy computer pictures. Why not get a stable job first, maybe in marketing? Something respectable. My father, Charles, didn't laugh. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any insult. When he finally spoke, his words came measured like a verdict. Art is not a career, Nora. It's a hobby. I didn't pay for an Ivy League education so you could play with pixels. They're not pixels, I said quietly. They're experiences, interactive spaces. The future of ownership. His fork clattered onto the plate. The future of this family is law business legacy, not whatever this is. Dad. Enough! His voice slammed the air flat. Lauren reached over, feigning sympathy, her manicured fingers brushing my wrist. We're just worried, darling. You're too idealistic. The world isn't kind to dreamers. Then I'll learn to be unkind, I whispered before I could stop myself. Patrick chuckled. There it is. The artist's rebellion. I wanted to scream. Instead, I looked at my father's face, hard and unreadable, the same face that had once taught me to ride a bike to keep my balance no matter how hard I fell. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who valued control more than love. He took out his checkbook, the sound of the tear slicing the air clean. Here's the last I'll ever give you, he said, sliding a check across the table. Consider it your graduation gift and your goodbye. I looked at the paper, at the ink that spelled out a sum I didn't need. Thank you, I said, folding it once, twice, and slipping it into my bag. My hands didn't shake, not yet. The rest of the meal went on as though nothing had happened. Patrick talked about a promotion at his firm, Lauren complained about charity committees, and my father discussed estate matters all while I sat there quietly burning. When dessert came, I stood. "You're leaving?" Lauren asked, offended that I'd interrupted her monologue. "Yes," I said. "I have work to do." "On your little project," Patrick teased. "On my future," I replied. He laughed again, and for a moment I almost smiled with him because I knew something they didn't, that the file on my laptop had already generated interest from 3 digital art collectors in London. I didn't need their blessing. I needed space. I walked out of that mansion into the humid Arizona night, the air smelling of citrus and gasoline. My car, a dented Honda Civic that my father despised, waited under the dim streetlight. When I started the engine, my hands trembled not from fear but from revelation. That night, I made a silent promise. I wouldn't argue with them again. I wouldn't justify myself. I'd build something so undeniable that when they finally saw it, words would fail them the way they'd failed me. Behind me, the Callahan house stood lit and flawless, a museum of pride. Ahead of me stretched nothing but darkness and the hum of possibility. It was the loneliest drive of my life and the most powerful. That was the last night I was just their daughter. The next morning, I became my own name. The first 5 years nearly broke me. I rented a room above an auto shop in Tempe where the air smelled of oil and burnt metal. I taught Photoshop at night, freelanced for small ad agencies during the day, and spent every remaining hour coding, sketching, and praying my laptop wouldn't die before my ideas took shape. My friends from college moved on to careers, mortgages, lives with plans. I moved between coffee shops with free Wi-Fi counting quarters to afford another refill. Still, I kept building. Viridian wasn't just software to me. It was defiance written in code. Every click, every pixel was another brick in the wall between who they said I was and who I was becoming. There were moments when failure felt permanent. A developer I trusted disappeared with 6 months of progress. A client refused payment after a project went viral. For a week, I survived on instant noodles and anger. Then an art blogger in Austin stumbled onto my prototype and called it a revolution in creative ownership. 2 days later, a small venture group reached out. They wanted to invest $150,000, barely enough to keep the lights on, but it felt like oxygen. I didn't tell anyone, not my father, not Patrick, not even old friends. Silence was my currency. I learned to play invisible. I drove that same old Civic, wore second-hand jeans, let the world assume I was just getting by. The less they saw, the more I could build. My landlord thought I was a night janitor. In truth, I was writing the future between midnight and dawn. The work was brutal, 18-hour days, no vacations, no applause. But the first time a digital artist from Berlin sold her work through Viridian and messaged, "You changed my life," I felt something sacred awaken. Not pride, not revenge, purpose. In those years, I stopped chasing approval and started chasing impact. Yet every December when the family sent out glossy Christmas cards, I'd receive one too. Smiling faces, perfect lawns, captions like "Grateful for another successful year at Callahan & Conan." I'd tape them to my wall as reminders fuel not nostalgia. One night, exhausted after another code sprint, I fell asleep at my desk. When I woke, the sunrise spilled across the floor, catching a small spiderweb of cracks in my coffee mug. I remember staring at it, realizing that beauty and fracture could coexist. That was me fractured, but still holding. By year 4, Viridian turned its first real profit, $240,000. It wasn't much by Callahan standards, but it was mine. I reinvested everything, built a better interface, hired 2 engineers I met online, and turned my studio into a company. No press, no noise, just progress. Each time someone told me digital art was a fad, I saved the message in a folder labeled receipts. By the 5th year, I had hundreds of them: emails, quotes, rejection letters, proof of every door that slammed shut. I didn't know it then, but that folder would one day become my favorite weapon. People think revenge requires noise. They're wrong. The loudest revenge is built in whispers in long nights, where no one sees what you're becoming. By the time Viridian crossed its first million, I had learned the art of erasing doubt through results. The Callahans still believed I was broke. I let them. In a world obsessed with appearances, invisibility was my shield and my strategy. 8 years into building Viridian, I received a call that stopped my breath mid-sentence. It was my father. His voice was smoother than I remembered, wrapped in a politeness that didn't fit. "Nora," he said, "come home for dinner. Let's talk business." For a moment, hope fluttered inside me like a foolish bird. Maybe he had read about Viridian's quiet growth. Maybe he was proud. Maybe the years had softened him. I dressed carefully that night, simple navy dress, clean nails, nothing ostentatious. The Callahan mansion looked the same white stone facade, manicured hedges, the kind of silence that costs money. Lauren opened the door glowing with rehearsed warmth. "Darling, you look wonderful," she said, her eyes scanning me like a customs agent searching for contraband. Patrick stood behind her phone in hand, smirking. Dinner smelled of rosemary and expensive restraint. Crystal glasses gleamed under the chandelier. For 10 minutes, everything almost felt normal. Then my father cleared his throat, the Callahan signal for an announcement. "We've been talking," he began, glancing at Patrick and Lauren about expanding the family's influence into new sectors. "There's this digital art thing you've been doing." "Viridian," I corrected quietly. "Right?" he said, as if the name were unimportant. "Patrick's firm has connections in intellectual property law. We could fold your platform into Callahan & Co., make it legitimate. You'd get a salary benefit stability." I froze, fork suspended. "Folded in ownership under the family," he said, tone firm. "You'll still run the creative side, of course, but decisions go through us. The brand would carry our name, Callahan Arts Fund." Lauren leaned in, smiling as if she were offering kindness. "It's protection, sweetheart. The business world can be so harsh for independent women." I studied them. My father's expectant eyes, Patrick's smug certainty, Lauren's sugary pity. Hope curdled into disbelief. They didn't want to join me. They wanted to own me. I set my fork down. "You want control. We want to help," Lauren said, feigning hurt. "After all, families should share success." I laughed, soft but sharp. "You never shared failure." Patrick rolled his eyes. "Don't be dramatic. You're lucky we're even interested." "Lucky," I repeated. "Interesting word." My father's patience snapped. "Don't make this difficult, Nora. We're offering you structure. Without it, that little art project of yours will collapse." I met his stare. "Then let it." His jaw tightened. "You'll regret this." "I already have," I said, standing. "Many times." Lauren reached out as if to stop me, but I stepped back. "Enjoy your dinner." "Where are you going?" Patrick demanded. "To build something you can't claim." I walked out, heels echoing against marble, every step a severed tie. Outside, the night air smelled of rain and citrus. For a heartbeat, guilt tried to creep in, whispering that maybe they meant well. But I remembered Lauren's words, protection, and saw them for what they were, the prettiest disguise for control. 2 weeks later, I received an envelope from the family's attorney. A draft contract. They wanted my signature to consolidate intellectual assets. The arrogance made me laugh. I didn't sign it. Instead, I forwarded it to my lawyer and had Viridian legally incorporated under an alias I'd prepared years earlier, Vale Holdings. The irony didn't escape me, Vale Latin for farewell. From that day on, I stopped hoping they'd change. I stopped wanting their approval. Hope had become a poison I no longer needed to drink. I'd let it die quietly the way they once buried my dreams. Only this time I would dig up the grave myself. I moved north to Seattle with 2 suitcases, 3 servers, and the kind of determination that no longer needed witnesses. Rain became my metronome, falling steady against glass as I built Viridian from a single room into a quiet empire. I rented an industrial loft overlooking the water and filled it with whiteboards, cables, and empty coffee cups. Every inch of that place smelled like ambition, burnt circuits, and caffeine. I stopped thinking of Viridian as a startup. It became a living organism that breathed through data and vision. Under Vale Holdings, I built layers of anonymity so deep that even my own engineers didn't know the face behind their paychecks. I recruited talent under pseudonyms, paid them through shells, created offices that didn't exist. The world began whispering about the ghost founder of the fastest-growing digital art company in the country. I watched those rumors with a satisfaction I couldn't share with anyone. Every headline that speculated about who I was felt like armor. Patrick's firm tried once to buy into Viridian's early investors. They didn't realize they were already negotiating with me. I let them submit the bid, watched them lose it by a margin of 1%, and archived the entire email thread in a folder titled Irony. By the 10th year, Viridian partnered with Amazon Studios to create immersive exhibitions. When the first one opened in Berlin, the press called it the Mona Lisa of the digital age. The name Veil appeared in every article, mysterious and untouchable. My father still sent Christmas cards carefully addressed, never signed. I never replied. Silence had become the language we both understood best. Success didn't feel like triumph. It felt like distance, a clean, sterile kind of freedom. But beneath it all, something restless grew. Every milestone made me think of that night at the dinner table, the check sliding across the cloth, the smirk on Patrick's face. I wanted them to see it not just the numbers, but the scope of what they had dismissed. Still, I waited. The timing had to be perfect. Then one morning, my assistant Jade walked in holding a glossy magazine. "You've made it," she said, placing it on my desk. The cover headline read, "Viridian, the $9 billion revolution nobody saw coming." I stared at it for a long moment, then whispered, "Not yet." I wasn't ready for them to know. I wanted them to find out on my terms in my world. That's when I bought controlling shares in a luxury resort in Arizona, the Crescent Mirage. It was elegant, remote, and conveniently the same place where my family planned to host their grand reunion. I told Jade I want a full takeover, private event, full discretion. She frowned. "You're really going to do it?" 15 years of silence, I said, deserve a proper ending. For months we prepared. I had the resort redesigned the decor, blending Callahan luxury with Viridian aesthetics, minimalist, technological, flawless. The staff signed NDAs. The event's guest list came through Patrick's assistant, who still thought the Callahans were in charge. Everything was set. The reveal would not just be seen, it would be felt. I stood by the window one night as Seattle rain streaked the glass, the city lights reflecting like falling embers. For the first time, I allowed myself a small smile. They had tried to erase me with silence. Now I would return the favor by letting silence announce my power. The Callahan family reunion was scheduled for the first weekend of May, a full-circle return to the Arizona desert where everything had started. Patrick's firm handled the invitations, which made it easy for my team to intercept them. I instructed Jade to send replacements printed on heavier paper, embossed with silver letters, hosted at the Crescent Mirage Resort, a celebration of legacy and achievement. They assumed it was still their event. They had no idea I owned the entire resort. 2 months before the reunion, I flew in quietly to inspect the property. The air shimmered with heat, the sky a blank blue canvas stretching forever. Standing on the balcony of the main villa, I could already see the look on their faces when they realized every wall, every chandelier, every glass of champagne belonged to me. "Make it perfect," I told the event manager. "Elegant but impersonal. They should feel impressed before they feel uncomfortable." Every guest suite received a gift folder sealed in dark green wax stamped with the Viridian Phi. Inside, we placed a custom itinerary, luxury welcome note, and a hidden surprise, a printed record of one missed opportunity. Each sheet listed the date and details of an email or proposal the family had dismissed, annotated with what that decision was worth now. Example, March 12, 2012. Rejected investment proposal, Viridian early funding round. Current valuation, $72,400,000. It was my favorite kind of revenge, educational. The staff signed airtight NDAs. Even the chef didn't know who paid his invoices. The Callahans believed they were guests of a mysterious sponsor supporting family enterprise expansion. In truth, they were about to walk into a living museum of their own arrogance. Jade stood beside me the night before the guests arrived, reviewing logistics. "Every room's prepared," she said. "The presentation system is synced to your queue, and the video timeline I asked. Final Cut uploaded. The voiceover's yours." Good. I looked out over the pool, the water perfectly still under the desert stars. They won't believe it until they see it. "Do you think they'll try to deny it?" Jade asked quietly. I turned to her. "They'll try. But denial doesn't stand up well against math." I wasn't nervous. I was precise. The last 15 years had been a lesson in patience, a crash course in turning pain into data. Now every insult had a line item, every dismissal, a return on investment. At midnight, I walked through the grand dining hall one last time. The chandeliers glittered like captured sunlight. Along the far wall hung an enormous projection screen concealed behind silk drapes. Tomorrow it would reveal everything, the timelines, the receipts, the faces they pretended not to recognize. I paused in the middle of the room, imagining my father's expression when the truth landed. The arrogance would crumble first, then confusion, then something closer to fear. He'd realize this wasn't a performance. It was consequence. Out on the terrace, the wind carried faint traces of orange blossoms. For a moment, I thought about what it would have been like if they'd believed in me. If I'd built Viridian with their blessing instead of their contempt. But hope was a currency I'd stopped using. It had bankrupted me once. I wouldn't let it again. I went back inside and checked the main control tablet. The final note on my schedule glowed on screen, Saturday 18th, Zaro truth revealed. Jade appeared at the doorway, her silhouette framed by the desert light. "They'll arrive in the morning," she said. I nodded. "Then let's make history." I walked up to my suite, passing the mirror-lined hallway that reflected me from every angle. I barely recognized the woman staring back, composed, dangerous, silent. The girl who once begged for approval was gone. What remained was a strategist, a ghost with perfect timing. Tomorrow, the Callahans would finally meet the woman they created. The first to arrive was Lauren. Always first, always immaculate. She stepped out of the Rolls-Royce as if it were a stage cue, her cream suit gleaming under the Arizona sun, her pearls perfect and cold. I watched through the security feed as she crossed the marble lobby, smiling at the concierge who bowed and welcomed her to the Crescent Mirage. She didn't know the concierge worked for me. She didn't know every inch of this place had my fingerprint on it. "Send her to the West Villa," I told Jade. "I'll receive her there." Moments later, Lauren glided in her heels, clicking a rhythm of control across the floor. She opened her arms as though we were actresses in a reconciliation drama. "Nora, darling," she said, her tone honeyed with practiced affection. "I had to come early. The family's buzzing about your little revelation." She lingered on the word little. I gestured to the armchair opposite me. "Sit. Coffee." She hesitated, surprised by the calm in my voice. "Please." The silence stretched as I poured the rich aroma curling through the air. For once, I let the quiet work for me, so she began adjusting the pearl bracelet at her wrist, this Viridian thing. Why keep it a secret all these years? We could have helped. I looked at her. "Helped? You mean managed." She blinked, feigning confusion. "You know, we only wanted what was best for you." "No, Lauren," I said evenly. "You wanted what was controllable." "There's a difference." Her smile tightened. "You always misinterpret kindness." I reached for the folder resting on the table between us. "Do you recognize this?" She glanced down. Inside lay a printed email, her words from 2012. "Charles, don't humor her. She'll outgrow the fantasy soon enough. The poor girl just wants attention." Her face drained of color. "Where did you get that? I keep everything I said. Receipts, memories, motivation." She tried to laugh, but it broke halfway. "Oh, Nora, we were worried. You were so lost back then." "No," I said softly, leaning forward. "I was finding myself. You just refused to look." She stood abruptly, her voice sharpening. "This is cruel. You can't just show you the truth." I interrupted. "After 15 years of being talked about like a ghost in my own family." "You're right. It is cruel. But it's also fair." For the first time, her composure slipped. The pearls at her throat trembled as she breathed. "Your father won't stand for this." I smiled, calm as stone. "He doesn't stand for much these days. He sits at his desk pretending the world still belongs to him." Lauren's eyes narrowed. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "No," I said. "Enjoyment implies equality. This isn't equal, it's overdue." She turned toward the window, blinking hard, her reflection fractured in the glass. For a flicker of a second, I almost pitied her. Almost. Then I remembered every holiday dinner where she'd turned my silence into a punchline, every fundraiser where she'd introduced me as our creative one with that pitying smile. I let the empathy fade. "Lauren," I said quietly, "there's a private dinner tomorrow night. I'd like you to sit beside my father. You're actually expecting us to show up after this. I'm expecting you to witness what you helped create." I stood, signaling the conversation was over. "You should get some rest. It'll be a long night tomorrow." She hesitated at the door, then said in a low, trembling voice, "You may have money now, Nora, but you'll never have grace." I met her gaze without blinking. "Grace doesn't build empires," I said. "It just covers sins." When she was gone, the villa felt suddenly lighter, as though her presence had been a heavy perfume finally clearing from the air. Jade entered quietly from the terrace. "How'd it go?" she asked. I exhaled, my pulse steady. "The cracks are showing. Tomorrow they'll break." By sunset, the resort shimmered in molten gold, a mirage made of glass and pride. The Callahans arrived in Waves-chauffeured cars, pressed suits, smiles sharpened like blades. My father stepped out last, still tall, still polished in his navy suit, his silver hair combed with courtroom precision. He looked around the courtyard, admiring what he thought was his legacy, reflected in marble and light. "Beautiful place," he said to the manager, who bowed low. "Tell your employer they have excellent taste." "I already have," the manager replied, but Charles didn't notice the weight of those words. Patrick followed behind, phone in hand, barking into it about quarterly reports. The perfect Callahan entrance power noise assumption. I watched from the terrace above, a ghost observing her own creation. They thought they were hosts. They were exhibits. At 6 sharp, the guests gathered in the grand dining hall. The chandeliers hummed with golden light, the long table set for 30 with precision that could cut. My father stood at the head glass raised. "To family," he declared, "to legacy." He didn't notice that the staff had disappeared. He didn't notice the faint mechanical whir as the lights dimmed and curtains slid back to reveal a 50-foot screen. Then the first image appeared, a single line of text glowing white against black. "Legacy is what you leave behind when truth finally arrives." Gasps rippled down the table. The Viridian logo unfurled across the wall in silver light. A beat of silence, then my voice, steady, calm, inescapable, filled the hall. "Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad you could make it." Heads turned. Some recognized the voice immediately. Patrick's eyes widened. "No," he whispered. "No, it can't be." The screen flickered to live footage of Viridian's first launch news headlines, interviews, valuations climbing year by year. Beneath each milestone flashed familiar names. Charles Callahan declined investment, 2011. Lauren Callahan dismissed proposal, 2012. Patrick Callahan terminated partnership offer, 2014. Their faces turned pale as the numbers appeared beside them. Millions, then hundreds of millions, then billions. I stepped out onto the balcony above them, the spotlight soft on my face. "You always said art doesn't pay bills," I said. "So I decided to make sure it paid all of yours." The room fell into stunned silence. My father rose slowly. "You did this to humiliate us?" "No," I said. "To educate you." Patrick slammed his fist on the table. "You tricked us." "I gave you chances," I replied. "You turned them into warnings. You called me lost. Now I'm simply found." Lauren stood trembling. "This is cruel, Nora. We're family." "Family," I said, my voice cool. "Family doesn't laugh while you drown. Family doesn't call your dreams delusion and then show up for the photos when they succeed." I nodded toward the screen. "You wanted legacy. Congratulations. You're part of history now." The footage shifted again to video clips, grainy but clear, of each time they had mocked or dismissed me. I hadn't planned to show them publicly, but the moment demanded truth. The guests murmured uneasy. The Callahans looked cornered, trapped in a narrative they could no longer control. My father finally spoke, voice hoarse. "You've made your point." "Not yet," I said softly. The reunion's theme was legacy. Let's finish it properly. I lifted my glass from the balcony rail, a toast made of irony. To silence the most powerful teacher we never thanked. I drank. Below the family sat frozen in a silence so deep it rang. No one spoke, no one clapped. The only sound was the gentle hum of the screen behind them, repeating the Viridian logo over and over like a heartbeat that had waited 15 years to be heard. When the lights came back on, no one moved. The chandeliers flickered back to life, scattering sharp reflections across stunned faces. Charles Callahan looked suddenly older, the kind of old that comes not from years, but from realization. Patrick's phone lay abandoned on the table, still recording, before the battery died, proof of a legacy unraveling. I descended the marble stairs slowly, each step measured deliberate echoing through the hall like a gavel. "You've seen the headlines," I said, my tone even almost gentle. "Now let's talk about numbers, the language this family respects most." I signaled to Jade, who entered, carrying 3 sleek envelopes. She placed one before each of them, my father, my brother, and Lauren. Inside, I continued, are the receipts. Not insults or memories, just math. Patrick tore his open first, his arrogance forcing motion. His face drained as he read. "What is this, the partnership proposal you rejected in 2014? I replied. "Had you signed, your firm would own 4% of Viridian. Current value $380 million. His lips parted, but no words came. I turned to Lauren. "Yours is simpler. It's a copy of the email you sent to your husband 13 years ago, suggesting he cut me off financially before I embarrassed the Callahan name. You called me a liability." She looked down at the table, her knuckles white around the paper. "That liability now pays the mortgage on this resort," I said. "In full." My father opened his envelope, last slower wary. He unfolded the document, scanned the figures, and let out a brittle laugh. 8%, he muttered. "You're telling me I could have owned 8% of all this?" "If you'd believed in me," I said. "Instead, you called Viridian a hobby and told me to find a real job. That decision cost you $670 million. The room went silent again, except for the faint crackle of a candle burning low. The other guests stared, unsure whether to look away or bear witness. I let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. "You wanted control," I said finally. "You wanted obedience. Instead, you taught me the art of detachment, the power of quiet. And tonight, I'm returning the favor." Patrick pushed back his chair, his face crimson. "You think this makes you powerful? You humiliated your own family for a headline." "I didn't leak the story," I replied. "Forbes did their research. All I did was stop hiding." He glared at me, jaw clenched. "You're pathetic." "No," I said, stepping closer. "I'm inevitable." Lauren began to cry, not the graceful kind, but the raw, shaking kind that ruins mascara. "We didn't know, Nora," she said. "We didn't realize how serious you were." "You didn't want to realize," I corrected, "because if I succeeded, you'd have to confront the possibility that you were wrong. And people like you, people who live on image, can't afford to be wrong." My father's voice broke the silence, low and rough. "Enough. You've proved your point." I met his eyes. "Not quite. You taught me contracts are sacred, Dad, so here's one more lesson in accountability." I nodded to Jade. She stepped forward and distributed fresh folders, thicker, heavier. "These," I said, "are formal settlements. Each includes a documented offer. Sign and you'll receive a small share of Viridian's charity division, a chance to support the arts like you always said you valued. Refuse and your names are permanently removed from the foundation records. No Callahan legacy, not even in fine print." Patrick stood shaking. "You can't just erase us." "I already did," I said. My father's eyes searched mine, something fragile flickering there, fear, maybe regret. He whispered, "You've become ruthless." "No," I answered quietly, "just precise." I turned away, giving them space to face what they'd earned. Behind me, papers rustled, pens scratched. The sound wasn't forgiveness. It was surrender. Justice in its purest form never shouts. It simply waits until the numbers balance. By the time the last signature hit paper, the chandelier light felt colder. The room smelled faintly of champagne gone flat. No one touched the food. Patrick sat stiff, staring at the contract as though he could will the ink to disappear. Lauren dabbed her eyes, her perfect composure fractured beyond repair. My father stayed silent, his pen resting beside the untouched dessert plate. The sound of the waves outside the glass walls filled the emptiness. I took a slow breath and spoke again, my voice low but carrying. You've all said your part without words. Now I'll say mine. I moved to the head of the table, the seat my father had occupied all my life. For once, I didn't hesitate before sitting. This isn't revenge, I said. Revenge is what small minds settle for. This is accountability. You each taught me something: how to hold my ground, how to use silence, how to turn neglect into momentum. So tonight, I'm giving you something back, a chance to redeem that lesson. I turned toward my father. Tomorrow morning, Viridian will launch its next initiative, the Callahan Arts Foundation. 5% of Viridian's valuation, almost $500 million, will fund young artists who can't afford the education you insisted I needed. It will carry your name, but only if you stand beside me at the press conference and say 3 simple words. We were wrong. Patrick scoffed. You're humiliating us again. No, I said. I'm offering you a place in something real. If you refuse, the foundation will still exist, but it will bear my mother's name, the one woman in this family who never asked me to shrink. Lauren swallowed hard, her voice trembling. You would really erase us. You erased me first, I said softly. This just balances the record. She looked at Charles, eyes pleading. Say something. He leaned back, expression unreadable, then finally spoke. What happens if we do it? Then you get to be remembered for your apology instead of your arrogance, I said. And perhaps for once, legacy will mean honesty, not inheritance. He studied me the same calculating stare he'd used on witnesses for decades, but this time he wasn't in control. You're cruel, he murmured. I learned from the best I said. The words landed like the closing of a courtroom door. Then, to my surprise, he picked up the pen again, not to sign, but to write a note. His handwriting, usually crisp and decisive, shook slightly. He folded the paper and slid it toward me. I'll give you your answer tomorrow, he said. Patrick pushed his chair back violently and stormed out. Lauren hesitated, her voice small. You may have won Nora, but you'll always be alone. I met her gaze. Better alone with truth than surrounded by lies. When they were gone, only my father and I remained. He stared at the city lights beyond the glass, the reflection of his own power fading in the window. I underestimated you, he said quietly. You erased the daughter I knew. You erased her first, I replied. He nodded slowly, the truth hanging heavy between us. For the first time, there was no anger in his eyes, just exhaustion, maybe recognition. I'll be there tomorrow, he said at last, voice rough. But don't mistake this for surrender. Of course not, I said. Just evolution. He stood and left without another word. The moment the door closed, the air felt lighter, as if some invisible verdict had been read. Jade appeared from the corridor, holding the signed folders. Was it worth it? She asked. I looked down at my father's folded note resting by the candlelight. Ask me tomorrow. She nodded and disappeared down the hall. I stayed alone in that cavernous silence, watching the flames flicker until the wax gave out. For the first time in 15 years, the Callahan table had no one left to silence me. And yet forgiveness, conditional, sharp-edged, and fragile, waited like a verdict at dawn. Morning came quietly, the kind of desert morning that begins in gold and ends in heat. From my sweet balcony, I watched the sun lift over the horizon, washing the crescent mirage in light so pure it almost looked merciful. The resort staff moved like shadows below, setting up the press area. Viridian banners fluttered beside the Callahan name, 2 worlds stitched together for the first and perhaps only time. My father arrived precisely at 8. No entourage, no performance. Just him in a gray suit and a face that looked carved from all the apologies he'd never spoken. He carried the folded note he'd written the night before. You slept, I asked. Barely, he said. He handed me the note. Inside a single sentence in his familiar script, we were wrong, but so were you, to let silence become punishment. I read it twice, then met his eyes. Fair, I said, but sometimes silence is the only language the deaf can hear. And now he asked. Now I said we speak. The press gathered on the terrace overlooking the desert, cameras poised microphones glittering in the morning sun. Patrick and Lauren stood off to the side, subdued, their perfect masks cracked, but intact. When I stepped up to the podium, the murmurs stopped. 15 years ago, I began. I was told that art was a hobby, that silence was obedience, that family came before individuality. Today, I stand as proof that creation is defiance, and that sometimes the quietest voice can reshape the loudest legacy. I gestured toward my father. He joined me slowly, each step deliberate, the air around us thick with history. He cleared his throat, his usual courtroom authority stripped away. "My daughter built something extraordinary," he said, "and we failed to see it. We were wrong." Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward. It wasn't a grand speech, but it didn't need to be. It was enough. I felt something inside me loosen. Not forgiveness exactly, more like release. A quiet untying of the rope that had bound me to their approval. The rest of the conference passed in a blur. Questions, applause, flashes of light. When it ended, I turned to him. "You kept your word. You earned it," he said. "But you also lost something in the process. Maybe," I admitted, "but I gained peace." Lauren approached her mascara light, but her voice small. "Nora," she said, "for what it's worth, we're proud. We were wrong." I nodded. Pride isn't the same as love, Lauren, but it's a start. Patrick didn't speak. He just met my gaze for a second, something complicated flickering there. Resentment, envy, maybe understanding. I didn't need his apology. Some debts aren't collectible. As the crowd dispersed, I stayed behind on the terrace, the air warm and dry. My father turned to leave, then hesitated. "You're stronger than I ever was," he said quietly. "But don't let strength become your solitude." "It already did," I said, smiling faintly. "Now it's just discipline." He gave a small nod and for the first time walked away without trying to have the last word. That was its own kind of reconciliation. Hours later, I returned to my suite, removed my shoes, and opened the curtains wide. The entire horizon blazed with sunlight, clean, unflinching, honest. I thought of that night 15 years ago, the check sliding across the table, the laughter, the doubt. And then I thought of the sound of paper this morning, the note, the contract, the confession. Justice and forgiveness share the same texture, paper, ink, and time. I poured a glass of water, lifted it to the light, and whispered, "Legacy redefined." The reflection stared back, not as a conqueror, but as someone finally weightless. For the first time, there was no need for revenge, no ache for validation, only a quiet certainty that I had rebuilt my life from the ashes of their expectations, and that was enough. Outside, the wind swept across the desert like applause no one could fake. The Callahans had learned their lesson, and I finally had learned mine. Silence can punish, but truth heals if you know when to speak.